Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. As the rest of our participants continue to stream in, let's get us started with a little icebreaker. So, in the chat, let us know where you're logging in from and what the weather's like today. And also, just for fun, since we are like almost in the month of Summit, can you let us know if you're planning to come to Summit? And go ahead and use the chat. Not everyone all at once, please. Great. I would hope so. I think you're presenting.
I know several of our panelists today will also be in attendance at Summit too.
I'm so glad. Okay, so
Yes.
before I go ahead and turn it over, because I promised you I'd only take up 2 minutes, I'll just do a very, very quick, easy hello and welcome. As you have obviously noticed, we're not on share. So thanks to being on Zoom today, my housekeeping notes are pretty minimal. A few things that I just want to make sure that you are aware of for all of those participants in the audience. You are at Dive Deeper with Carnegie, Stump the Slate Squad. During the entire session today, the chat will be open. So use the chat, not the Q&A, but the chat box function. I will be manning the chat and taking all of your questions. We also had a number of pre-submitted questions that I think will keep our team pretty busy. And in case you were wondering, this session will still be recorded and shared with you after the fact so that you can either rewatch or share with any of your other colleagues. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jess. Thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you, Carnegie, for hosting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. What a lovely introduction. And hello to everyone. Thank you all so much for joining and welcome to today's webinar, Stump the Slate Squad. We're so excited to take questions from the audience as each of you work to get your burning Slate questions answered and ultimately try to stump our Slate Squad. So I will start by introducing myself and our speakers. We'll hit some logistical items and we'll jump into the bulk of the presentation here, which will mainly be questions and answers. So we're very excited to get started. So hi, everyone. My name is Jess Sievert. I'll be the moderator today of our Stump the Slate Squad conversation. I am the VP of Enrollment Communications here at Carnegie. If you aren't familiar with Carnegie, we offer groundbreaking services in many areas: research and strategy, digital marketing, lead generation, student search, web development and creative, financial aid optimization, and of course, Slate, which is mainly what we're here to talk about today. So we have a variety of types of strategists in our Slate Squad. I lead our team of Slate communication strategists and enrollment data specialists, but we also have strategists that specialize in other areas of Slate, from portals to reports to overall implementations and more. And you all will be lucky to be able to meet some of them here in just a minute. So I am going to do a quick audio check just to make sure you all can hear me. Can someone pop in the chat and say, oh, I see some thumbs up from my team members, so I think we're good audio-wise. But thank you for that. And now I'm going to actually pop in and introduce you to the real stars of our show today, the 8 members of our Slate Squad who will be answering your questions. So they will go ahead and share their roles. They'll share their favorite Slate feature or hack. And you'll also hear them share their archetype persona. These actually come from an original Carnegie model, which we apply in a lot of our work to better understand institutions and the students that they recruit and retain. We also use it to help understand our own team members. So you'll see here that my archetype is the compassionate and curious seeker. So I would love to, I'll also share my favorite Slate feature or hack. Mine is all about batch management and foldering. I love to be organized, so that is my favorite for sure. But I'll actually pass it off to Adam to get us started with introductions of our panel.
All right. Thanks so much, Jess. So I'm Adam Horton. I am a Slate enrollment implementation strategist, and my persona is the inquisitive and attentive guardian. And my favorite hack or feature, I guess, is adding a search box to a field on a form. That way you could search through all the prompts that are associated with that field, especially if you have a long list of prompts and you want folks to be able to get to that prompt that they're looking for, that major or whatever it is, really quickly. And then I'll pass things along to Allison.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, y'all. My name's Allison Beebe. I am the Slate Student Success Implementation Strategist here at Carnegie. My archetype persona is the considerate and determined pioneer. And my favorite Slate feature is an entity. I truly believe we can fix most things with an entity. So if you have entity questions today, bring them on. I'm going to pass things over to Bryson.
Thanks, Allison. Hello, everybody. It's so good to be with you. My name is Bryson Kelly. I'm a Slate front-end strategist and work on the front-end side of things, a self-proclaimed portals nerd, as we call it. My archetype is the resilient and inclusive shepherd. And then my favorite Slate feature is the ability, you may already be aware of the ability to use today in date time filters, but you can also use now. And I'm going to pass it on over to Navia.
Thanks so much, Bryson. Hi, everyone. My name is Navia Winderling. I'm a senior enrollment data specialist at Carnegie, and my persona is the energetic and adventurous trailblazer. 1000% favorite Slate feature, query libraries. We build some complex reports, so having everything already built in a query library makes that so much easier. I'm going to pass it over to Nick.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Nick Porcella, Assistant Director of Slate Trainings, the industrious and meticulous philosopher. Excited to see everybody here. I'm a huge fan of the configurable joins base explorer, especially the diagram view, which I know is controversial. I love it. You won't change my mind. I will pass to my possible cousin, Rocco.
Thanks, Nick. Hey, everybody. My name is Rocco Percelio. I'm the director of Slate Frontend here at Carnegie, and my persona is the intelligent and conceptual searcher. My favorite Slate hack, since I am a portals guy myself, portals nerd, just like Bryson, is that if you are in the source code of any content section and you hold Control and click, you can click into multiple locations and type on multiple lines. So if you have like a table that you're trying to edit the classes of like 8 rows simultaneously, hold Control, type it once, you're good to go. I'll pass things over to Riley.
Thanks, Rocco. And that tip actually saved me hours of work here as an enrollment communications strategist here at Carnegie. My archetype and persona is the determined and discerning ambassador. And along the email kind of time frame, my favorite Slate feature is to utilize translation codes to personalize your subject lines in any kind of email. Adds a little spice. And I think last but not least, I'll pass it over to Ted.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ted Majensky. I'm the SVP for Slate Implementation Support. I'm the sophisticated and sympathetic advisor. My favorite Slate feature is ping retroactive matching, and that includes records that have ping records before they exist as people in Slate. So you can do some very interesting things with some marketing tracking there.
Awesome. Thank you, panelists, for introducing yourselves. Love all of the Slate favorite features. If you all here in the audience have any favorite Slate features or hacks you want to share in the chat, please do. Always fun to share with one another. But I also would be remiss to not mention some folks from our Slate Squad that are behind the scenes in the chat. You might have seen them in the chat already. Justin, Laura, Nina, and Tom are helping us out with answering some questions and monitoring the chat. So huge thanks and kudos to them for being here as well. So before we get started, just a few details before we dive in. This will be a 60-minute webinar entirely dedicated to questions and answers, hence the name Stump the Slate Squad. We have got a lot of questions that were submitted in advance, so thank you all for that. During the webinar, you also can ask questions using the Zoom chat. Feel free to ask any questions as follow-ups to answers that we are talking about or any brand new questions. We'll be taking as many questions as we possibly can during the session. And any questions that you all put in the chat that might be best suited for a written response, those will come through the chat as well, so keep an eye out there. And truly don't worry, though, we have a lot of questions that we are certainly not going to get through all of them today, but we will be following up with a post-webinar Q&A blog, so we'll answer all of the questions on that blog. So we'll be sure to pass that around to you all afterwards to make sure you have all of the content. And as we all know too, Slate Summit is just around the corner, as Sarah was saying, and I am betting Technolutions has some updates and enhancements that they're preparing to share with us next month. So with that being said, we'll also say that some of the answers to some of these questions, those answers might change considering the ever-evolving nature of Slate. So just wanted to give that heads up, and then finally mention that this webinar will be recorded and that it will be available on your home slate after the presentation. So everybody, I think we're ready to stump the Slate Squad. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you all can see our lovely Brady bunch of folks here, of our Slate Squad team members. And we'll start out with kind of 2 questions in one. We got 2 questions that were kind of similar, and they're about consolidate records. So the first question is, our consolidate records have not been updated in quite some time, and we know that there should be records to merge. What's the solution? Related, the other questions, what triggers records to be reconsidered for consolidate records? Specifically, are low priority emails and addresses considered? Any tips, tricks, and insights would be great. So I know a lot of folks on our Slate Squad do love consolidate records. So I'm curious if anyone has a response to these two questions.
Yeah, Jess, I'll take that one for sure because I do love Consolidate Records. I spent, when I was a Slate captain, I spent time almost every single morning in Consolidate Records. Love a nice clean Slate instance. And so Consolidate Records is one of the ways we can keep things nice and tidy in Slate. I will say, the Consolidate Records, every time, a new record gets created, it has a possibility to match another record in Slate. And so a lot of times that can happen when someone fills out a form, registers for an event, starts maybe a new application, uses a different email address, or even when a file is uploaded through Upload Dataset, that can create new records as well. And I will say, obviously there's great knowledge in the knowledge base about Consolidate Records. But really, looking at first name, last name, date of birth, that's one of the big ones. If we have all the matching, if all those match, Slate's automatically going to merge those records together. Same thing, first, last name, email. If all three of those data points match, it's going to merge that together. But other records might need to show up in Consolidate Records if all those things don't match just right. And so as a human, you'll have to look at those records and see, which data points are the same, which ones might be different, and then determine, do you need to merge those records together? Part of that question was about addresses and email addresses and their priority, and really that does not matter with Consolidated Records. You can have a low priority or a normal priority or a high priority email address or address, and that will still get considered as a possible match there. As long as that address is not inactive, then it will include that in your possible matches in Consolidated Records. I will say, one of the big things here, just be in the habit of clicking that refresh all button in Consolidate Records because you want to make sure that any new possible records that might not be a match will show up there. So, maybe that's the first thing you do when you log in to Consolidate Records, click that button, make sure you're kind of up to date. And then you can go about sort of making those matches as you need to. So one thing I will mention, maybe it's sort of just paying attention to how records are getting created in your instance. Are you getting complete data? Are you missing date of birth on a lot of records, or are folks giving you preferred name or like a nickname or shortened name rather than a first name or a legal name? And so just keep an eye on sort of how data is coming in, making sure your data is as complete and as clean as possible. I will say a few other tips and tricks. Obviously spend some time on this every day. It can build up pretty quickly if you don't stay diligent. So, hopefully you have at least a couple folks that can get in there and do some work in Consolidated Records every day just to make those matches. And then, click that refresh all button like I mentioned a few minutes ago as well. I will say a few other things that can be helpful are some audit queries. So, you can build additional audit queries to look for other data points that might be common amongst records. And then also you could even create a Consolidate Records a dashboard to show some data points also. And so lots and lots of things to sort of help you to be able to look at these records, stay on top of Consolidate Records, and make sure that you're keeping things all nice and tidy in your Slate instance.
I love that, Adam. You covered all the bases there. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
That's
you're welcome.
awesome. So many good tips and tricks. Karen also put in the chat a link for documentation on troubleshooting Consolidate Records. So definitely good to check that out as well. So thank you so much, Karen, for adding that. Awesome. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit into some deliver land. We have this question. It is, can you reset someone to start an email campaign over? For example, you have a record with a bad email that never got campaign emails, and then later we get a good email from another source. Is there an easy way to reset or have them start over or start the campaign over? We have prospective students missing important emails. Anyone able to answer this one?
Pick me. I'd love to, Jess.
Go for it, Riley.
Okay, friends. So sadly, there's not like an automatic way that Slate knows that that's a bad email. So unfortunately, it does have to be a little bit of a manual review process right there. If you're getting a lot of these, our suggestion is to create perhaps a custom tag that says, email refresh or something along those lines. You can add that tag. Let's say you get notified by the student. It says, I'm not getting any emails. I'd love to get this email to this email address. You can add that tag to that student if they're already in the population. Go and make sure that your population rule is excluding that tag in the rule filters. Go ahead and refresh that student all the way out. It'll kick them back out because their tag excludes them from the rule. It'll boop them out of the population. You can take that tag back off and then run the rules again, and it'll boop them back in, and they'll start over at day 0. As long as that tag is being filtered out in your population rule, there should be no problems. For your prospect and inquiry campaigns, we do suggest that it's best practice to continue to put that important information, like here's where our application lives, here's how to visit, all of that stuff needs to be sprinkled throughout the campaign, not just in a couple of specific emails, just in case there's a student that you don't catch on those one-off instances. Since we're kind of collectively pushing them towards one direction, it doesn't matter exactly at what point they get it, as long as they know what they're going to do. So make sure that information is kind of, like I said, sprinkled throughout. Your population rules are your friend, so make sure that they are as specific or as general as you want that email campaign to reach. It is for you. It is built to make sure that your students are connected with correctly. Now, if this is happening with your applicant pool, that's a little bit of a different problem, because those students really do need to put the correct email address on their application. But we all know who high schoolers are, and sometimes they have a little bit of difficulty remembering their last name. So what you can do is add a little bit of spice to your forms that you send out to your applicants, and you can have some form logic on the email address field. And when they put it in, if it says like .k12 or .edu, I'm in South Carolina, so all of our high school email addresses are .k12.sc.edu, .us, which is just erroneously long. It's unnecessary, but you can include that in that form logic and say, when they type this in, if it includes this, please pop up this secondary question that says, hey, looks like you put in a school email address. Would you mind, giving us your personal email address to make sure that you don't miss any important information as you move forward throughout your journey as a potential student? Could help cull some of the non-delivered or the bounces as well if you implement that. I think that's all I got.
I love that. Riley, love the ideas. Also, I think we should petition to Technolutions to officially change the terminology in the knowledge base of booping in and out of campaigns. I think that's an excellent idea. I love that. Awesome. Thank you, Riley. All right. We have got a portal question next. So got our portal people's ears to perk up. How can I put a link to a person scoped or user security portal on a person record tab so that it auto executes and opens the portal when you click on a link? Any thoughts, team?
I might jump in and take this one, Rocco, if that's okay. I think this is a really, really fun question. And really, there's a couple different ways to be able to approach this. But really, the most effective way is to then pass through query string parameters via a portal embed on the form that is linked to that person scope tab. Jess, is it okay if I share my screen? I might actually just walk through it real quick. And
that'd be great.
Let's do a little bit of building together. All right, can you all see the screen okay?
Yep, looks great.
Amazing. Okay. So I'm just going to come into my sandbox portal because as a portal nerd, I always have a sandbox. And let's go ahead. This is a person scoped with a user security. So let's update that here. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come into, let's use this person data query. So whatever exports that you have in here, how we're going to set this up initially with the portal embed is first, we are going to go ahead and remove the portal identity filter. And now we're going to grab another filter of the GUID. And then we're going to declare this. So I like to use @PID person ID. If this is an application scoped query, I like to use maybe AID, but this is going to allow us to be able to pass that parameter through. You'll see that error right there that we must declare it, and we're going to do that here in a second. So we're going to save that so we have that filter on the GUID. And then let's go ahead and export the person GUID. What we're going to name this is exactly what we named in the filter. So I'm going to use PID, and we're set there. Now we're going to go ahead and edit the parameters. So in this parameter right here, I'm actually going to grab the syntax because sometimes you can't always remember the syntax. But essentially what we're going to do is with this parameter statement right here, this ID is matching PID. So whether you call it person ID, I like to use a lot of computer-friendly language that's pretty simple. This is going to be the unique identifier that we're going to go ahead and utilize. So we're going to go ahead and click save. And once we go ahead and do that, we're good with the portal. We're going to embed it. We're going to come in here and allow embedding. We're going to copy this code, and we're going to do some fun things with this code. But let's get into a test form. So take one of my forms right here. We're going to go ahead and edit the form. And first, we want to make sure that this form can be tied directly to that tab. So we're going to make it a person page. We're going to go ahead and save that. And then we're going to go back in, and what we're going to do is we're going to add the GUID. So we're going to join to person real quick and add that GUID for the person. And I'm just going to call this again, computer-friendly language, lowercase GUID. Now we're going to go ahead and save. So this is going to be the form that will tie to the tab. But before we do that, we want to embed the portal. So I like to use an instructions block. That's really kind of the best way to get to the source code. And that embed code that we had in there, we're going to go ahead and paste that. And we're going to follow this kind of script in here, and we're going to see this source. So if we follow this right here, you're going to see essentially the link to the portal. And what we're going to add right here is we're going to append, I'm going to say PID equals the GUID. And now we're going to be passing that parameter through. We'll click save. And I won't show this too much, but then what you'll do is go into your tab and make sure that that's linked. And now every single time that you click on that person record, the tab that's associated, it will show that information and automatically load with the correct data showing the person record that you're on.
Nice.
Bryson, that was wildly cool, Bryson. I'm just going to jump in with one little thing though about the coding example that you were going through there for the folks in the audience as well. You may have noticed that when Bryson was adding that query string parameter, he didn't just use an ampersand. He typed ampersand AMP semicolon. And the reason for that is that there are some locations in Slate that you actually have to use like the Unicode variation of symbols rather than the symbol itself, so that the URL, regardless of browser, can be processed appropriately. So sometimes you'll see us use an ampersand, sometimes it'll be ampersand AMP semicolon. They function the same way for the computer. So just wanted to mention that one point little quickly right there.
Awesome. Thanks for the assist, Rocco. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you both. That was so neat. We did get a note in the chat and ask to actually post the questions in the chat as well, so you all can follow along a little bit better. I know we are moving quickly, so I will go ahead and do that as I'm asking the questions moving forward. But still continue to post your questions and answers in the chat. It might get a little busy, but you can still at least read along if you are a more visual processor for these questions. So next ones are about entities. So I'm pairing these two questions together because I think they can be answered together. So first we have a notes entity for advisors to enter notes after their advising appointments with students, but we can't figure out how to pre-populate the advisor in the submitter field when they're submitting the note. What are we missing? And then also when a person scope form is submitted, you can trigger an email to go out immediately. I would like to have this happen on an entity widget form, but the communications tab is not available. How can I trigger an email to send instantly when an entity widget form is submitted? In this use case, the email going out hours later from a mailing is not sufficient. I already see Allison off mute. She already said entities was her thing, so I am just assuming that Allison wants to take this one.
Yeah, I needed to call dibs immediately because I was
Yeah, right.
to let this one pass me by. You know,
Go
I want
for
to
it.
answer this. Okay, so a couple things to unpack here. For our first folks that are having trouble with pre-populating a field, unfortunately, you cannot use query string parameters to pre-populate fields on an entity widget, which I'm assuming is the issue we're running into. However, I have a workaround, and I'm actually going to share my screen as well. And this workaround will also solve the issue for our second friend. So let's jump in. All right. Obligatory, can you see my screen? Cool.
Almost,
Maybe.
not yet. There we go. Now you're good.
Love it. Okay. Alrighty, I'm gonna hide this guy. I'm working on one screen today instead of my usual several. And if for anyone that ever is in that situation, if you feel like you've also lost a limb, you understand. Okay, so a couple things for notes entities. A notes entity is also my favorite flavor of entity. So whoever asked this question is my favorite person. All right, so for getting around the issue with being able to pre-populate the submitter or the advisor on your entity widget, the way that we will typically do that is by having a person scoped form with all of your entity fields mapped to that person scoped form. Once we have that person scoped form, we can do our regular query stringing and pre-populate that submitter field or any of the other fields that we need to pre-populate on that form for you. So this is the Carnegie Student Success Sandbox instance. So I can show you some examples in here. So for a notes entity, if we go into forms, what we would expect to see here, and I already have notes up, which is wonderful, is we would have 3 separate forms to power our notes entity. We have a tab that actually houses the widget information for notes. We have our notes entity widget, and then we have this additional person scoped form for our notes information here. So if we come in here and we edit our form, we can see that the scope of the form is person, but all of the fields that are mapped to this form are mapped to our notes entity. So when we submit this form, it's still going to write to our notes entity. It'll still display with our widget, but it's actually being powered by a person scoped form. What I like to do with this as well is we will typically put on our students' dashboard a button to add a new note. And when we click into here, the pop-up is that person scoped form. And we can see here, our note submitter is pre-populating to me. We make this a read-only field so that you can't submit notes on behalf of your friends. And this is pre-populating to me as the current user of the system. The dashboard, I can show this button here too. Let's take a look at our person dashboard. So this button here, if we take a look into our source down here at the bottom, we can see that we are pre-populating our note submitter field to our current user. And that is being powered, yes, I would like to close that, by the current user in our dashboard query. So you can put that button on your student dashboard for your backend Slate users. If you're doing this in a portal, if you have a row of student data, you could also have a button there that would pre-populate for sometimes external faculty members and student success role don't have backend Slate access. So if you're leaving a note for a student from a faculty portal, you could do the same thing there as well. That solves pre-population side. The issue with being able to immediately send out communications also can be tackled here. When we have our person scoped notes form or our form that is for any entity that's person scoped with our entity fields mapped, this will give us that edit communications function, which we actually do use typically for notes too. You can send a receipt of a note. We sometimes have referrals as part of our notes process, and you can set those to send immediately upon form submission. And I need to figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
That was awesome, Allison. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Entities queen. Okay, next question. I'll put it in the chat. Is there a way to provide queries to faculty without granting query user permissions within their user account or without building a portal to use the queries?
I can grab that one, Jess, because I've gotten the question more and more in 2025. This is becoming an issue for folks. And sadly, I think the short answer is no. But let me give you the long answer. I'm glad that this individual mentioned portal, but probably can empathize with me. We have portals people on this call. Hooray. I am not that person. So let us talk through maybe a couple of ideas. There are pros and cons to everything, but here I would say that you should at least consider granting that sort of base level query or queries permission. Pro and con to that, the pro is that the individual can only access the queries that they're given direct permission, either by user, by role. I'm sure many folks here know the con of that is they can create their own queries. I think that's an okay trade-off. Right now, that is probably the short answer to it. I will encourage, though, if you haven't considered other features in not just the queries module, but in a lot of places in Slate, like that grantee feature. It would be in that, usually that right sidebar under edit permissions. On each individual object, in this case, the query, you can have some additional granularity to account for, like, hey, I want to give this user or this role a certain level of permissions. For example, like, we'll use you, Jess, as the example. If you said, I want to see this query, I could go in, have this grantee feature that allowed Jess only to run the query, or I could check off another box and say run and edit. Those are probably our most common solutions now, given that there's not much other functionality. Go upvote those feedback requests, though. I will say you might consider realms. I am not a realms expert. I think we have a couple of folks here who maybe could speak to it more in depth, but I'm sure if you go to the knowledge base and type in realm or realms, the first or second article is going to give you the full walkthrough. I find that they create more headaches than they save, really, because if you're going to go the realms route, you really need to train everybody up. You need to have really tight processes, because the first individual, intentionally or not, who builds something outside of that realm sort of breaks that wall. So the short story here, probably not a great solution. You could build that portal. I would consider weighing the pros and cons there, trying out that grantee feature. And if it becomes a perennial issue for you, maybe looking into something like realms or population permissions.
Awesome. I love that advice. Thank you, Nick. Okay, next question is about origin sources, which is one of my favorites. So this submitter said, I've made updates to origin sources, but I'm still seeing many records without appropriate origin sources as I've set them. I thought they all refreshed overnight. Anyone? Go ahead, Navia.
Origin sources are my jam, y'all. And they're amazing. They're super flexible. They are forgiving. So you can make updates to them kind of on the fly as you are introducing a new source into your instance. Changes will typically calculate overnight. However, if there are any records that have not been updated within the last year, then they are not going to automatically recalculate for new origin sources. But there is some fun kind of work that you can do to make sure that they do. We'll typically create a custom field. We call it origin source update. We'll set it as a free text and a date type, and then build a query to identify the records that you want to update. Run that query and apply the field. You can pop in the date that you're doing this update, and then that will refresh the records and ensure that they recalculate overnight. I think having the date is really handy too, because then you'll have a reference point for when you have just done a force record update. And you certainly don't have to call the field origin source update. It can be a force update, whatever you want, but it's a really great trick. Check it out the next day and sources should have refreshed.
I love it. Thank you, Navia. Yes, Eric, we do love a forgiving feature. That's one of the best parts about origin sources for sure. All right, we'll keep moving right along. Next one is, I need to omit certain majors for international students. I have tried setting filters on the majors field for our application. Each time it is either timing out or the major to be omitted for international students is still populating. What can I do? Any thoughts from the team?
Yeah, Jess, I'm glad to grab that one. So
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, I do love a good application logic. I spend a lot of time working in applications and what I do here on our team. So I don't know exactly, how your page might be built or your application might be built, but I'm guessing that it's probably similar to how most institutions do it, where we have your personal background page. It's going to have, your citizenship information on that page, and then another page in the application where you're collecting that major that the applicant is choosing. And so if that's the case, which I'm guessing it probably is, you may just want to ensure that those questions that have to do with citizenship are answered first before the applicant gets to that page where they want to indicate what major they want. So, of course, the citizenship status is a field that is created basically on the answers to three different questions there: the primary citizenship, secondary citizenship, and permanent resident. And so it's this derived field that you get. And so, one way that I, I've done it several times before creatively to think about how we want this to show up. Once the applicant gets to the page where they are selecting the major, you can add some logic there just to look for an existence of that citizenship status first. And if they haven't answered that part of the application yet, drive them back to that personal background page so they can answer those questions. Put some help text there if citizenship status isn't existing there already, saved to that in the database. And so drive them back to that page, have them answer the questions. When they get back to the page where they're going to pick their major, then that help text would disappear because now we have a citizenship status that's been set for that applicant, and then they can choose the major, and then that's kind of when your prompt logic will come into play here. And so I would recommend being as kind of straightforward and in your prompt logic as possible. It sounds like maybe some of the logic here on the prompts is getting a little too complex, and so you might even want to try to simplify it a bit and just say, if for those majors they're only available to domestic applicants, U.S. citizens, just set the prompt logic there for citizenship status equals U.S. citizen, and just for those ones. And then all other majors that are open to any applicant, don't have any logic on that. That way they would all show up. And so that way, you're really kind of just limiting those programs. Maybe it's an online program. I see that pretty often. Online programs only being available to folks who are living here in the U.S. and domestic or U.S. citizens. And so you might just sort of limit it in that way as well. I guess a good rule of thumb, really, when we're thinking about prompt logic too, is just to do that in the positive rather than the negative. Just to, set your logic so that you make sure that the prompts that you want to display not those who don't meet that criteria, but just those who do meet the criteria. So, again, you might just need to think about just sort of how you can simplify some of that prompt logic to make sure you're not you're doing too much in your instance there when folks are trying to select those majors.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All righty. Next up, we're just cruising through these questions, and thank you all for your activity in the chat too. This has been awesome so far. Okay, I am working on creating an organization statistics dataset row query using the suitcase and the knowledge base. Love that as a starting point. The prospect and inquiry terms come from an entity. How do I use the lookup prompt base to return the counts for the prospect and inquiry columns? Excellent question. Any thoughts? Rocco?
Can I jump in? I jumped in
Please.
ahead of Allison because I heard the word entity, but I wanted to answer this one.
Okay, you got it.
What I love about this question is that it's already building on a couple of things we've already talked about today, which is really exciting because if I'm remembering the template query that you're talking about correctly, it is essentially a query that is on the lookup prompt base and uses a parameter to pass through the SIEB of an organization so that it essentially creates an aggregate count based on term prompts to display essentially a year-over-year display on organizations, on their organization record that will display essentially how many inquiries did you have, how many applicants, how many deposits did you have for fall 2025, fall 24, fall 23. And so just for anyone that might not be familiar with that query, because it is, it's a little bit more nuanced in the way that it's configured. If it's starting on the lookup prompt table, the reason it's doing that is so that each of the rows that are displayed on the resultant export are your terms. So fall 2025. And because of that, you need to start from the lookup prompt table where every single row will be a prompt value. And so then if you need to get to aggregate counts, what you have to do and what this template query does is starts with a subquery. And the reason you need subquery exports is so that you can use the aggregate count output option. What that will do is just count all passing rows, essentially, that pass the logic within that subquery, as long as you have joined in a one-to-many relationship. And so by default, what this query does is join from lookup prompt to field values. On the field values table, that's a one-to-many. For any number of field values, they could be satisfied with that prompt. And so that's where we're getting the one-to-many relationship, and then ultimately joining from field values to person to add that parameter for the SIEB to limit those counts just to the students that attended this school. All works great, except when you throw in the curveball of an entity, because you're not able to join directly through field values to that entity, to that person, to that school. And so when you're in Slate and you get to a point where you need to get to access to a table of data that you can't join directly through, you really have one tool in your toolbox at this point, which is independent subqueries. Independent subqueries, I always like to just say proceed with caution. They're not always necessary. In many cases, you can find a direct join path to get you from point A to point B. So, and here's the third tie-in from earlier. Nick mentioned the configurable joins explorer. Explore there so you can learn your one-to-one joins really, really well. But in this case, you will need to use an independent subquery. And the base of that independent subquery would be person or your entity, whichever you prefer. It just will change some of your join paths from there. And what you'll be doing in your filters for that, because your independent subquery is a many relationship, it's a none to many relationship, you need to establish that one to many. So you will filter on the prompt value of that actual entity field value and compare it to the entity row or to the prompt row on the base of your query. It's a little bit complex, but that's the way that you're able to create that relationship back and forth. Independent subquery, get to your prompt value from your entity that holds your term, and then make sure that matches the prompt value as well. Once you have those matches, now you have access to the person information too. And so that would be the way that you can create that aggregate count, independent subquery, pull it in, and it will fall into line with everything else.
Rocco, you are very good at explaining those things in a very understandable way. Thank you so much. There are so many different pieces to that. So thank you. That's awesome. Excellent. Okay. Our next question is about emails. Yay, one of my favorite topics. What are some resources you use for formatting emails that are received well to multiple different types of emails, Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, and that are mobile friendly? What type of code do you use? How do you format your buttons? Anything around making emails look better? Oh, there's so much we could talk about here for sure. Anyone have some initial thoughts?
Oh, I do. I
Go ahead,
do.
Riley.
As a part of the communications team here at Carnegie for about 2.5 years, I've built an unquestionable number of templates for partners. So I've spent a lot of time in Deliver and in the source code in particular. Our amazing creative team utilizes Stripo heavily for our template design. And they will pass that to us. We'll copy the code from the back end and then go into the Deliver WYSIWYG and post that into the source code there. And from there, we do have to still make some edits to make sure that it does, fit into Slate and it's not just really pretty as a PDF, that it actually fits really well and as a functioning email. We also in Carnegie utilize a proofing system. It's called Email on Acid. And we will, once the email is fully built, once we've got the copy in there, we've got all the hyperlinks and everything ready to go, we'll post it into the Email on Acid proofing system. And it'll give us a screenshot of how it's going to look on a mobile screen, on a desktop, across browsers, whatever you wanted to look at. So that's very helpful. A couple of tools that are our favorite. Some additional tips though, we do very strongly encourage having a media query in your HTML source code for your templates to accommodate that mobile view. This media query basically is just a statement that tells the computer, like, if the screen is less than 600 pixels wide, format everything to look like this, as opposed to what it would look like on a desktop. This is why it's extremely important for you guys to have high quality images and to have a standard across your institution as to what that quality is going to look like. As a note, Outlook hates everything. So it's going to ignore basically anything you tell it to, but you can try your very best to force it to listen. Gmail does the same thing with your dark mode coding. It will, regardless of the fact if you tell it what color you want it to print out the text or the background color for a certain image. In dark mode, I want it to be this shade of purple. Gmail's going to go, actually, that's not the best purple. So I'm going to choose a different one for you. And this is the purple you're going to get. We can do our very best to try to make it ignore it across other users and everything. So using a proofing system is definitely the best way to check behind yourself. We do have, and I'll post some links here in the chat in just a second, but I did check with our in-office accessibility guru, Nick, about his color contrast checker that he loves the most. And so we do utilize that to make sure that, if you're using a screen reader or if they are on dark mode or anything like that, that the colors do contrast correctly and they're not conflicting and hard to read. We've already talked about this in the chat, though, like W3 Schools is fantastic. You can use like LinkedIn, you can kind of go wherever you want, but never ever underestimate the power of ChatGPT. If you've stared at something for like longer than 45 minutes and you're like, this should be easier than what I'm making it, copy the code, go open ChatGPT, paste it in there and say, this is my code. I want it to be mobile friendly. Can you help me? It will think through it by itself and then spit it back out to you. You can then copy and paste that back into the WYSIWYG. It has saved my butt when I have sat there and stared at something for way longer than Jess needs to know that I sat there and stared at something. But, just a fun fact for you. My last tip is to always, always, always have a backup font in your font family in the style code. Because if you have a beautiful branded font, something that is gorgeous, something that is, institutional, but Gmail doesn't recognize it, it's going to give the reader Times New Roman, which is pretty lame. Slightly better than Comic Sans, still lame. So when you go into the HTML source code, you can just Control F, search, and then type in font family, font dash hyphen family, and it will show you everywhere in the style tags where you have your fonts. You can add as many as you wish. You put a comma in between each of them. You'll do your first favorite, second favorite, third favorite, and then I like to put a catch-all of sans serif at the end so that no matter what, no one gets Times New Roman when they open an email from me. It's just a personal tidbit, but those are my favorite things.
I love that. And again, like I mentioned before, there is so much we could go through and on this topic specifically. So I do want to quickly plug, we have a couple of members of our team partnering with a couple of our partner institutions as well to present on this at Slate Summit. The presentation is going to be called Optimized and Accessible, Mastering Email Deliverability and Mobile-Friendly Design. And we'll be walking through some really good examples of mobile-friendly design and kind of seeing that on the screen, I think will be helpful too. So definitely check that out if y'all are attending Summit. It should be a really great presentation. Awesome. Thank you, Riley. Okay. Next up, regarding duplicate email and mailing addresses, where one is normal priority and the other is low priority, is there an easy way to identify those records and remove or merge the duplicate email addresses or emails or addresses, and the remaining one would be normal, similar to how we merge schools and consolidate records?
Jess, I would love this one. I want to build something so bad. I also know we're at the
Go for it.
3/4 mark. Let me share.
Awesome.
If you can't see the show, first thing that comes to mind is a comparison. Let's build a query. Queries solve everything. I'm going to skip past the parts I hope folks know. Again, I don't have that much time. Bear with me. We're going to be counting people with duplicates. I think there's probably a few ways you could do this. We didn't mention earlier, this is our fictional database. All these people are fake. Let's build a comparison. So if you've never been in the aggregates and these subqueries, use them. They're your best friends. So we are looking at a comparison because I think what we want to do here is really look to see, hey, Slate, can you help me identify people whose field one, either the address or the email, wherever it is, could be for more things, equals or has the same value as something else. So for that, let's build a subquery export. Oh, this is fun. And copy that, because again, brevity. Let me do two birds, one stone. Sorry for that analogy. Let's do the address one first. I will mention for the question about emails, it's probably a similar, if not the same step, just looking at like the devices table. My gut's telling me there's probably a few other steps there, like adding in like type and priority for filter. So not that much harder, but a couple extra variables. Again, for time, let me try maybe just addresses for today to do proof of concept. Oh no, I've made my screen too zoomed in. There we go. And from there, let's add in For today, just street. I think this will give me what I need. If you're actually doing this, I'd probably make a concatenation to do the whole thing, like with city, region, zip code. In a rare case, you might have somebody with an address at 123 Main Street in 2 cities. Probably not common, but you'd want to account for that. So for today, in an effort to be timely, we'll make the first piece of the comparison. Hey, Slate, we want to compare this part of the address to, and then we'll make a copy. Why reinvent the wheel? We'll call this rank 2, and we'll just update. And so what we've essentially done, the recap of this so far, we have made 2 subquery exports within the subquery filter to say, hey, we've got a piece of this first address we want to compare to a piece of the second. And in order to identify, are they the same? And then you can indicate as such. You could also look for not the same, but that doesn't sound like our question for today. So let us name. Hope you get the gist so far. Again, wanting to be conscious of time. So dear Slate, look for people whose are rank 1 address and rank 2 are the same. I imagine this number will be small, I hope. While we're waiting, I will say that you'd probably want to add a few exports here, like actually visualizing what that rank 1 and rank 2 address. 9, we like 9. You'd probably want to add those in your exports and have like a really quick glance look and save this. All I really want to do today to round out proof of concept is cross our fingers to see, did this work? Let's add in a reference ID and actually just go find a record, which I think will be a good segue into like the part 2 of this. So if I preview, pull a record, doesn't really matter which one. All right, we go look at profile. Hopefully we have 2 of the same. There we do. 504 Napa Valley Lane, that sounds lovely. So we've got basically everything here the same except for type. That's probably where I'll leave the first part of the question is, that's one of a few ways you probably could identify, build a query with a comparison statement. In terms of like the actionable step, the part 2 to that, I'm a former teacher. I think the teacher in me would say, if you're new to anything I just did, or if your number is small, like 9, I would probably go through them one by one and actually go into Abhinav's record here and maybe delete one. This really isn't merging like what Adam mentioned earlier for consolidate record. It's not really the same thing here. So you probably could delete individual items. If you are more of a Slate nerd, you want to understand what's going on here, and or you've got a lot of these, or this is a frequent issue. 1, probably want to evaluate some things. 2, I would say you probably could build like a retention policy in order to help you. That's more than I want to get into here. Shout out to Adam. I think, Adam, you did a great webinar for us on retention policies I can find and put in the chat that's on our website. So if you want to learn about some of those other tools, that's probably the long term if this is a recurring issue. In summary, query is probably your friend, something with a comparison. There's a couple of really great knowledge base articles that may also help you. In fact, I think I would say they're 1 and 2 of our colleague Justin's favorite. Justin's in the chat, so say hi. But definitely his favorite on determination of table ranks is going to be something to help understand this. But also, oh goodness, matching criteria for system objects is probably another one. So there are a lot of things you can learn about this. I've already taken more time than I should, but that's probably your best approach for getting started. So I will stop there.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nick. I very much appreciate that. Thanks for showing the behind the scenes too. That's great. Okay, we are quickly running out of time, folks. We could do this for hours, right? I think we can fit a couple more questions in though. And we have seen several questions in the chat about reports. So I did want to pull one from our list about reporting. And it is, my reports always time out. Do you have any tips or tricks to get them to run? It happens to the best of us. Anyone have tips they want to share?
I would love to take this one, Jess, because
Please.
Reports definitely take some time to run. I've seen it, but there are some really quick tricks, that you can just pop in to try to get them to run a little bit quicker. So first things first, I love to throw in a top filter at the very top of my report. So if you are doing a funnel year over year, looking at 24 and 25, consider throwing in a 24-25 created applications filter and then also 24-25 prospects and inquiries. That's going to help limit the data that Slate is processing within that report. So hopefully make things run a little bit quicker. You can also add filters to the row level just to make things run a bit quicker. Sometimes that helps. And then thinking through using subquery exports when possible, trying not to rely on global joins because that can absolutely slow things down. And then I think last but not least, just knowing that if you've got any formulas or SQL, that's certainly going to slow reports down. Think about breaking apart sections. So we've got a report here at Carnegie that looks at an overall funnel, but also the search funnel. Break that baby apart so they can run separately and a little bit quicker. And then let me think. I do see that there's a reporting question in the chat, Sam, that you mentioned. I want to do a little bit of detective work on this for you. So hold tight. I'll be answering some additional reporting questions in our blog. But I know that there are probably some other tips and tricks. So any of my colleagues have some things to add to get them to run a little bit better?
Yeah, Navia, I might jump in because, again, self-proclaimed portals nerd. I might suggest, especially when it comes to loading efficiency, to maybe think about reporting centers or putting those reports in a portal. I think doing that in portals really allows for some of the pre-filtering and even scoped data loading based on the user's context. So imagine if you're using populations and roles and things like that. So if you have a user with a certain role and they're only seeing that data for, matching populations. So instead of running a large static report that includes data for all users, you can leverage the functionality of a portal to create kind of a reporting center to be able to show some of that specific user-based information in that context. Plus, you have a lot more flexibility on how you display the data via maybe tables, data table plugin, charts, where you can show a lot of things like counts and even still include some of the bar charts and some of the graphs that are already built in with Slate, but within a portal and a view, you might have a little bit more flexibility. So I just wanted to also plug that. And maybe even in the blog, we'll provide some examples.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely a lot of tips and tricks we could share there. So we can definitely elaborate more in the blog too. Thank you both. Let's squeeze in one more. It's also reporting related, but any recommendations for Slate reporting on digital advertising work in Slate? What kind of ROI metrics can we access there? Thinking ping is the best place to start. Any thoughts on that one, team?
I feel like it's appropriate to jump in right at the very end, not answering any until now. So this is great timing. I do like Ping a lot for reporting on digital because you do get obviously anything that comes into Slate that is getting logged and tracked through the Ping base. You can tie it to person records. It is only part of the picture though, and that's kind of the important thing is you're getting those records. It's not necessarily the same UTM credentials you get from your forms. So if you have form submissions and you have digital ads going to forms, those are getting logged separately. So it is in the form base there, unless that's an embedded form, and then your website should be picking them up. What is really nice and what's really fun is you can and should potentially look at doing a marketing data set and actually pulling in and saying, we're going to build all of our campaigns, and usually you do have to work with marketing on that. Get your campaigns built out in the marketing data set, have an entity tied to it so that you can attach it to those student records. So if you're doing a source format from Facebook and you're bringing them in, not only are you saying this is tied to that actual data set entry of that marketing campaign, but you're tying to the specific students. So with that data set, you can log your budget, you can log your spends and what you're looking at from an annual basis. And then you actually have the funnel data that's accurate in Slate tied to it so that if I'm saying, here's all of my students that have applied and this is how much we've spent, this is what our spend is per student application, and this is what we get from our enrollment. That's not a small process. That does take a lot of work. But using the Ping data, you can run a boomerang. I like to call them boomerang exports to bring the Ping data back in. You can obviously do that with, when Allison was talking about the entity fields on a form, you can have those tied to it as well. So really, whether it's coming in through source format, through Ping, through through a form submission, everything can get fed back into that data set, as well as the entity that's tied to the data set and the student, and kind of link it all together, which is super fun.
Ted, thank you so much. We have literally 1 minute left, so I don't want to keep folks. I know everyone is very busy, but I want to encourage a round of applause to all of our wonderful Slate Squad panelists. Thank you all so much for your participation today. I'll share my screen one last time to share a couple of resources we want to share with you all. And I'll put these links in the chat too, just more ways to get connected with us and learn about some of the things we do and connect with our Slate Squad even further. So feel free to share or to save these links, screenshot the QR codes, whatever you need to do. But we are just so happy to have spent this time with you today. Again, we'll have a follow-up blog being posted that we'll share with you all. And I'll pass it back to Sarah to wrap us up.
Thanks so much, Jess. Thank you, team. Thanks to everyone in the chat, and thank you guys for staying engaged and keeping the questions flowing. As Jess mentioned, we'll follow up with a recording of the session, and otherwise we'll catch you at the next Dive Deeper. Thank you all.
Thank you.